with him, and that meeting is continuing. There are some good days in Congress for these hearings, and there are some difficult days. Today, we have several pieces of legislation on the floor, and we may be interrupted. Nevertheless, let me welcome all of you to the Subcommittee on Africa's hearing of the political crisis in Ethiopia and the role of the United States. Today we will hear testimony from the Assistant Secretary of State, Mr. Hank Cohen, and several private witnesses. It is our hope that the testimony given before the subcommittee today will lend some clarity on the political conditions in Ethiopia. The famine and poverty in the Horn of Africa is well known and an often documented international disaster. However, the political developments and the recent historical events preceding the current situation are not as widely known. The peace talks recently held in London and brokered by the United States raised several questions concerning the policy of the United States regarding the resolution of long-standing, complex, and multifaceted political struggles taking place within Ethiopia. It is important to note that as the oldest independent nation on the continent of Africa, what happens in Ethiopia has a serious impact on the entire region. The political strife in Ethiopia has had a somewhat rippling effect on its neighbors in the region, and what the United States does to contribute to peace, stability, and democracy in Ethiopia can set the stage and the standard for enhancing democratic change throughout the region. This hearing is not designed to resolve the problems of governance in Ethiopia. The subcommittee recognizes the complicated nature of the problem and for the first time has invited private witnesses from the Ethiopian community to provide testimony before the subcommittee. While we tried to convene a balanced panel, we were working within our bureaucratic limitations and do not profess that each and every line of political thinking will be referenced or represented here today. However, we are confident that the overall issues have been covered. This hearing is designed to present a clear and accurate picture of what the United States policy is towards Ethiopia and our policy in relationship with the current authorities in power, and further to explain what role, if any, has the United States played in the departure of the former president, the convening of the peace negotiations in London, and the resultant political situation. We are fortunate today to have a distinguished panel of private witnesses whose testimony will explain the various political perspectives and provide an historical account of the factors leading up to today's current political configuration. We've asked the witnesses to provide their assessment of the role of the United States in the Ethiopia crisis and to suggest ways in which we can further enhance peace and stability in the country. In performing our responsibility of oversight and guidance in the development of the United States policy toward Africa, we encourage that today's panelists may be able to contribute to the knowledge base of the subcommittee and the American public on this devastating and politically crippling crisis. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize my distinguished colleague, Mr. Payne, who may have a statement. And Mr. Payne, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will just make a very brief statement to say that I'm very pleased to participate in this hearing and congratulate you for calling this very important hearing. Ethiopia is a country that, as you indicated, is one of the oldest civilizations in the world. I had the privilege to visit Ethiopia in early '73 when the so-called unknown famine was ravaging throughout Ethiopia. Visited Wallo province and Dessie city, and went back again in June of '73 when this famine unfolded. We have seen so much strife, and I've returned on a number of occasions since that time. But we're really looking for a period of peace. If we can have a strong government in Ethiopia, develop and come to some kind of accommodations in the Sudan, get a government in Somalia, I think that entire region could start to stabilize itself. Mozambique come on board, and I think that we could see a period of improvement, development, and growth in Africa with these things happening. So it's hopefully this hearing will unfold some plans for the future. And once again, Mr. Chairman, I commend you for calling this hearing.
The committee is especially pleased to have Mr. Cohen here. In the 7 months that I've been chairman, I've always found him to be a straight shooter, very straightforward in his response, very responsive to the committee's request to appear and talk about issues on the current political agenda. Mr. Roth is recognized for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I commend you for holding this timely hearing. With the overthrow of the brutal Mengistu regime, Ethiopia has its best opportunity to establish a government which embraces democracy, respects human rights, and addresses the desperate human suffering caused by years of war, famine, and repression. Ethiopia is one of the great nations of the world, one of the great civilizations of our planet. For many years I have worked on this issue, and I am pleased to welcome to this subcommittee, as you had mentioned, Mr. Chairman, Ambassador Cohen and the other wonderful people that we have on the panel, including Mr. Jonas Deresa, President of the Ethiopian Refugees Education and Relief Foundation. He is one of the true leaders of the Ethiopian community in the United States, and I commend his testimony to my colleagues. We must not let this opportunity go unfulfilled, and we must make sure that the U.S. policy supports the Ethiopian people's realization of a long struggle for freedom. It would be a tragedy if the defeat of Mengistu only leads to another repressive regime with a different name. The United States cannot let that happen. And I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses about what we can do, what should be done for the cause of Ethiopian freedom and democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This hearing, Secretary, is proof that this committee responds to constituent requests. The origin of this meeting was a result of a phone call from another member whose constituents were concerned about this issue, and as a result of which we began putting this meeting together. So thank you very much, and you may begin, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the recent political developments in Ethiopia. In the space of one remarkable week in May, sub-Saharan Africa's second most populous country experienced a watershed in its history. A dictatorship that had lasted 14 years was overthrown. Organized fighting stopped for the first time in 30 years. These events leave Ethiopia poised at a historic crossroads. In order to discuss where the future leads, I would like to briefly review the events that have brought us to this point. Events of 1988 and 1989 are discussed in my written testimony, and I will skip here to 1990. In the summer of 1990, at the request of both Addis and the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the U.S. began to explore whether there was a substantive basis for further talks between the government and the Eritreans. We chaired 2 meetings, which at least had the merit of getting into matters of substance. But both sides put familiar positions on the table concerning federalism and self-determination. Neither showed a disposition to advance. As the second round of talks was taking place, events on the ground took over. In February of this year, a series of new offensives by the EPRDF removed 3 more provinces from government control, and the front began to close in on Addis itself. Mengistu's government clearly was powerless to reverse the encroaching tide, or even hold it off more than briefly. The question was no longer whether the government would survive, but whether there'd be a bloody battle for the capital before the regime changed. The government admitted as much in an April statement that called for a roundtable on, quote, transitional arrangements, unquote, while at the same time appealing for new mobilization against the enemy. Government officials urged the U.S. to help facilitate a peaceful transition. They affirmed a keen desire to include rebel groups and others in a restructured regime. The United States agreed with this goal, and after meeting with the EPLF and EPRDF rebel groups in Khartoum, invited the government and the groups to a meeting in London to help bring about the peaceful transition that all sides claim to want. Our goal was to replace war with peace and find a path forward to a more broadly based and democratic political system. We sought a transitional mechanism that could produce an interim government made up of all Ethiopian parties. Events in late May quickened. On May 21, Mengistu fled Ethiopia, and a final unraveling began. By May 27, the day before the London meeting formally was to begin, the Ethiopian government's forces had lost their ability to offer any organized opposition, and the only thing keeping the EPRDF out of the capital was the insurgents' own decision to hold back while the London talks were going on. On the 27th, Acting President Tesfaye Gebre Kidan told us the Ethiopian army had virtually disintegrated and that he and senior government officials were extremely concerned about their ability to provide for law and order. The acting president said that the government intended to broadcast a call for a unilateral ceasefire and an appeal to the citizens of Addis to accept the EPRDF when they entered the capital. The EPRDF decided to move into the city that night. The United States agreed with that decision because the EPRDF was now left as the only disciplined force capable of keeping order in the capital. At that point, the Addis regime effectively ceased to exist, and their delegation in London dropped out of the talks. The final part of the London meeting began with the United States no longer in a mediation role between the government and the insurgents, but in a de facto advisory role for the three opposition groups about to inherit all military and political power. Our London meeting thus ended without the appointment of a transitional government as we had envisaged, but it ended with something perhaps even better. The insurgent groups themselves argued that a transitional government was not possible until more political factions were present and participating. In a joint statement, they themselves called for a meeting of a wider range of political parties and interests to establish a broadly based transitional government. This meeting is due to be held not later than July 1. So, despite the changed circumstances in which it was held, we really think the London meeting accomplished a great deal. First, the Mengistu regime, doomed by its own misguided policies, is gone, but without the pitched battle for Addis that some had feared. Second, there is an interim administration in place that is temporary and solicitous of wider membership and political participation. It seeks Western help in forming a true transitional government. Third, and most important, in this fragile transitional stage in Ethiopia, the juridical issue of Eritrea's future did not really arise among the parties in London. A provisional administration is installed in Asmara, as it would have been whatever happened in London. But there is general, if tacit, agreement that the long-sought referendum and the final determination of Eritrea's status can await a more stable situation emerging in Addis. We welcome this disposition of the key parties toward realism. We have long believed that the issue of Eritrea's judicial status needs both time and an atmosphere of peace before it is approached. Forcing an early resolution of this matter is a recipe for disarray and discord. Thus, another significant achievement of the London meeting was its demonstration of realism. We hope this spirit continues to prevail next month at the Addis meeting. We are working toward that end. The EPRDF has proceeded to establish an interim administration in Addis, which is working with the existing civil service to reestablish essential services and has assured the donor community that relief will be given first priority. The group in Addis has made reassuring public statements about its commitments to democracy. It seems to be extending its hand to other political groups inside and outside Ethiopia. We have already seen one dramatic benefit from the departure of Mengistu. The humanitarian problem of Ethiopian Jewish immigration, which had lasted for generations and which had been the subject of intense diplomatic activity in recent years, was resolved literally overnight as a fleet of mostly Israeli aircraft carried more than 14,000 people across the Red Sea in a heartwarming echo of the great exodus that took place so long ago. We hope to see equal benefits in other areas. Conflict has been the chief cause of food insecurity in Ethiopia. And now that the fighting has ended, we hope to be able to send food directly to the needy without cumbersome negotiation of safe passage arrangements for crossing lines of battle. We have cautioned the interim administration that future cooperation from the United States depends on their holding to their announced commitment to human rights, democracy, and due process for all. A generation of conflict in Eritrea and 17 years of internecine warfare following the 1974 overthrow of the emperor have left deep bitterness and divisions among the many ethnic and political factions. Our objective for the Addis meeting is to see a stable coalition emerge, one that can lead Ethiopia into free elections and establish the groundwork for a democratic constitution and form of government. Our greatest challenge will be to convince the people of Ethiopia that after years of war and a mentality geared to conflict, they can now dare to look at the future with a positive outlook. Ethiopians must be able to look on themselves as capable of building a nation, one that can live in peace with itself. One thing is clear: Ethiopia's future lies in the hands of Ethiopians. We can and will press, cajole, and push in the direction of democracy and reconciliation. But it is up to the Ethiopians themselves to show the willingness to work together if there is to be peace and democracy in Ethiopia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, in the past, this administration, the previous administration, has been reluctant to work with governments or groups with Marxist socialist ties, and I cite Angola as a good example. In this case, you are working very closely with the EPRDF. What's the difference between this group and other groups, example in Angola? What are the circumstances that cause you to work so very closely with them?
Mr. Chairman, we are concerned about the ideological and intellectual baggage that these new forces are bringing with them. But I'd like to point out that we have been talking to them for well over 2 years now. While other governments have shied away from dealing with rebel groups because they didn't want to offend Mengistu, we didn't have that problem. We didn't care if we offended him too much, and we were talking to them. And we've been working with them and trying to point out to them that the ideologies that they've espoused are really outdated and no longer useful, and have proven their uselessness in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And we believe that they're coming around to a new point of view. And also, they seem to be rather committed to the idea of democracy, whatever they feel about the economic procedures. So we're not saying that we've convinced them, or we're not quite sure what's in their minds, but we've laid down markers. We've said to them, if you go democratic, the United States will help you. If you go back to the old Mengistu system, the United States will not help you. And we feel they should have a chance to show what they can do, and so far, they've done the right thing.
Just before the breakdown of the government, during the debate on the foreign assistance bill in the committee, the administration opposed language by Mr. Burton and myself to provide for a referendum in Eritrea. Do you still have the same position, considering the fact that the I forgot the the acronym now. Yeah, EPLF is now urging a referendum, and they're being supported by the government in power in Ethiopia?
Mr. Chairman, as I said in my prepared testimony, one of the good results of the London meeting is that the Eritrean question has been pushed off into the future. all emphasis now is on the stabilization of Ethiopia. I would say that the less said about the Eritrean question, the better, and that congressional statement at this time would probably not be helpful.
Okay. I want to remind the members that we have 5 witnesses to follow and 2 pieces of legislation on the floor, and therefore the chair intends to observe the 5-minute rule. We now call on Mr. Burton, having shown a good example of self-restraint.
As always, Mr. Chairman. Let me just make a brief statement, and then I'll yield to my colleagues, and then hopefully I can ask a question or 2 later. I apologize for my tardiness. Chief Buthelezi is in town, and we had to meet with him as well, so I apologize. I only wish to make a few brief remarks because our time is limited, and I will accede to the chairman's wishes, and we're all eager to hear from all the witnesses. But first and foremost, I want to express my own appreciation and admiration to Secretary Cohen for the remarkable work he did last month in London. I really mean that. The transition in Ethiopia and the evacuation of the Ethiopian Jews were accomplished in great measure because of your efforts. I think your place in history is assured, and I want to commend you for your courage under such difficult conditions. So I salute the administration, and especially Hank Cohen and Bob Fraser from the White House and Irv Hicks from State. As for the current situation in Ethiopia, I have 3 points I wish to raise. First, the overthrow of Mengistu was long overdue and constitutes a huge step forward for Ethiopia. Mengistu was the Saddam Hussein of Africa, and the blood of his hundreds of thousands of victims cries out to us from the ground. Ethiopia has a chance for salvation now, and America is ready to assist. So far, the new government is doing and saying the right things. We all want this to continue. Secretary Cohen put it well when he said in London, no democracy, no cooperation. I believe the Congress seconds that message. If the new government continues to move boldly towards democracy, I believe we ought to encourage them by upgrading our ties to full diplomatic relations. And second, the number 1 priority in our Ethiopia policy right now must be famine relief. 8 million Ethiopians may starve to death. We must not allow that to happen. We absolutely must take the lead in assuring that food, medicine, and supplies reach those in need, and we must begin to work on long-term strategies to bring Ethiopia to a state of self-sufficiency. And I'd like to get into that later because I talked to some people who have some abilities and some technology to offer, which I think can help the starving masses in Ethiopia become self-sufficient in the long run. It is high time that Ethiopia stop being a symbol of suffering and death. With their talent and education, the people of Ethiopia are capable of making significant positive contributions to the rest of Africa and indeed to the rest of the world. And 3, the end of the civil war presents an opportunity for the people of Eritrea to determine their own fate. I know that you said we shouldn't get into that in too much detail, but I will make just a brief comment on that. It is a right they have earned through fire and blood. The Eritreans have won the love and respect of all who have come to know them. Their achievements, even in the face of terrible adversity, are the stuff of legend. Their humility and perseverance are worthy of our awe. And the humane treatment which the Eritreans have meted out to their enemies is unfortunately all too rare in this world. Nothing better illustrates this last point than the comments of Isaias Afwerki, leader of the EPLF, during his return to Eritrea. During the ride from Sudan, Isaias passed dozens of bodies of dead Ethiopian soldiers. As reported by Jane Perles of the New York Times last week, he said, quote, "When you see such destruction, you forget about victory. It's a very sad thing to see these innocent people put in this position. Mengistu should be made to see this," end quote. Mr. Chairman, America has always had a great interest in Ethiopia. In the past, that interest emanated from legitimate strategic considerations. Let us all resolve now to maintain our stake in Ethiopia, to help lift the Ethiopian people out of their current misery, and to assist them in achieving the prosperous democracy which they yearn for and which they are capable of building. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Burton, you have an A for timing. Mr. Payne.
Thank you. I, too, would like to congratulate Assistant Secretary of State Hank Cohen for the outstanding job that he did in the conflict, and his knowledge of the region certainly showed through by the excellent diplomatic work that was done. Mr. Burton placed you in history. Now, I'm not so sure I'll go that far, but I do think that you've done really an excellent job, and it's just a continuation of what you've been doing on the continent. Just a brief question. As the government settles down and in the assessment of what needs to be done, what are the first 3 or 4 kinds of programs do you see necessary in Ethiopia through either AID or economic assistance or whatever?
Well, Mr. Payne, I think before I address that, I would like to say that there's an immediate political requirement. At the meeting July 1, I would hope that they could organize a very broadly based transitional government, or as they call it, a provisional government. And it would be very important for us to observe to see that it's truly broadly based so that all ethnic groups and political factions can feel represented and no one should be left out. Secondly, they will want to organize themselves to have an election. That's something that Ethiopia doesn't know much about, is free elections. So they'll want to have an election for a constituent assembly, say 6 months down the road, which would then be impaneled to write a new constitution, a democratic constitution. And then finally, they would want to have, based on that constitution, an election to elect a parliament and a government. So I think that is to begin with the most important priority. The people currently in charge, the interim government, have wisely allowed the current civil service to continue operating. Ethiopia has always had a very efficient civil service, despite all of the turmoil. And
a good airline.
And a good airline, correct, Mr. Chairman. I would say the first priority should be, in terms of reconstruction and rehabilitation, is getting out of the Marxist economic system as fast as they can into a free market system, especially in agriculture. I understand that Mengistu did take away some of the Marxist restrictions in some parts of Ethiopia, as a result of which farmers had an incentive to fertilize their ground and put in some investment, and that there's been some better harvests in the last year or so. So if we can help them extend that, give them the agricultural credits, the money for fertilizers, for machinery, and they can become self-sufficient in food, thereby ending the need for humanitarian assistance, thereby allowing our money for that to be transformed into development assistance. So agriculture is priority number 1.
Thank you very much. I recall in '73 when I visited the second time, the government was put in the hands of His Excellency Liche Nakache Makonnen, who was a very outstanding and brilliant man, who was then taken out of government and executed. And it was downhill ever since that point. And as you've indicated, I just hope that the new government or the federation of political parties and interests will consider strongly the plan that you've laid out, and hopefully we can move on to that, the redevelopment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One final point, Congressman. If they do get to the point of having a democratic system where they will deserve development assistance, we will need to eliminate some of the restrictive legislation that prevented us from aiding Mengistu. I'm sure you would all go along with that.
Yeah, I think by then we'd be in conference committee. Thank you very much. Mr. Roth, I know you must feel a sense of personal vindication today, because I know years ago you came to me and said to me that we need to work together on this question of Ethiopia. So you're recognized now.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for remembering our conversations over the years. Mr. Ambassador, the EPRDF has, I would consider, a very narrow base of support among the population. What, in your assessment, is their ability to broaden this base? And I'm assuming that in order for us to have a democratic government, in order for this government to work, they have to broaden their base. And what is your assessment of doing that? And sort of dovetails in, I think, with your answer to Mr. Payne.
I believe they have the desire to broaden the base. When we had the meetings in London, we fully expected them to form their own provisional government, that is the EPRDF, the EPLF, and the OLF, the three combatant groups. And when we called a meeting to say, okay, are you now ready to form a provisional government, they said, no, we don't want to do that because we don't represent all of Ethiopia. We want other people to come in and help us form a provisional government. And I thought that was a rather democratic statement to make. So we immediately adjourned the meeting and said, okay, we'll see you in Addis Ababa in a month or a couple of months from now. So there is the desire to do it. One of the big questions is, does the rest of Ethiopia want to work with them? And I would urge the rest of Ethiopia, the various political groups that are out there, both inside Ethiopia and in exile, to give these people a chance and try to work with them in order to get a broadly based provisional government.
Mr. Ambassador, as the chairman had mentioned, I have long had an interest in Ethiopia because I do feel it's one of the great nations of the world, and there are people who are very gifted. But what is the possibility of Mengistu trying to come back? I mean, he must have forces left, troops left. What effective, does he have any effective power at all now?
I would say that he does not have effective power. The troops that he had were really not fighting very well because they no longer had confidence in him. And they were losing a lot of their arms in combat. That, in effect, is how the EPLF and the TPLF were able to get so many arms, by capturing them. So I would say that most of the former troops want to go back to their homes and resume civilian lives. They were mostly all draftees. So I would say there's very little chance of the Mengistu coming back, either ideologically or militarily.
Here in our country, where at the time of the Civil War, you surrendered and then you signed a pledge and then you went back home. Is this basically what they're doing in Ethiopia today? I mean, when they pick up one of Mengistu's former soldiers, what does he do? Sign a pledge and then he goes back home, or what is the setup?
I don't know that they're signing a pledge, but they are being sent home and they're being treated humanely. And by the way, I'd like to inform you that we have been, thanks to the United States military, we have been sending in rations that have not been used in the Gulf to help feed these people as they go from military life back to civilian life, because we want them to avoid trying to loot or to steal. We want them to go back in a peaceful way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Roth, before I call on Mr. Ackerman, I want to place in the record without objection a statement by Mr. Gamazian, Deputy Representative of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front to the United States and Canada. To so ordered. Mr. Ackerman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote on the side to put you back in history.
I hope I can make it to Rosh Hashanah.
God willing. Let me echo the sentiments of my colleagues, Mr. Ambassador, in expressing our appreciation to your specific generous talents and abilities in being able to work this whole program. An awful lot of skill, an awful lot of luck, and an awful lot of good timing went into it. You mentioned in specific towards the end of your statement, the Ethiopian Jewish community that was finally able to be reunited under a family reunification program, and certainly your attention to that matter, small as it was, in the midst of this whole otherwise overwhelming picture, certainly is indication of your great caring for even those small groups of people, and your great concern for detail. A lot of miracles went into this, into that process, and those of us who followed that issue in particular are very, very grateful. Also, the skill with which you put together the whole package and which you continue to pursue is certainly worthy of all of our admiration. A couple of questions. How would you think Ethiopia is going to transit to a mixed or free market economy? Is there any indication that there is any plan on the horizon? Do we have any programs in place in which we can, if called upon, be of assistance in making that transition?
I do not know of any plans in place, Congressman, but I think we can move rather quickly. Once we see that the country is stabilized politically and that they're moving on a democratic path, I think I'm quite confident that my colleagues in AID could move rapidly there.
Now, we have not officially made any formal recognition of the new group in Addis, as you referred to them?
Whenever there's abrupt change in government, we never go through the process of recognizing. We deal with the power structure that's in place, and we work with them slowly. At some point, if they do the right thing, we will want to exchange ambassadors with them, as was recommended by Congressman Burke.
That you're saying on the ambassadorial level?
Yes.
At the initial instance?
Not immediately, but
at the appropriate point.
Right. Correct.
Have there been any other nations that have recognized the group in Addis, the coalition, as?
We have not heard of formal recognition, but all governments, to the best of my knowledge, are dealing with them officially and are awaiting the formation of the provisional government before they take any formal recognition steps, I believe.
Are we monitoring whatever the processes are for the, under which I understand some of the members of the former government above the level of department heads have been arrested? Have trials actually begun? Have there been formal charges made?
At our London meeting, we had a considerable discussion of that subject. We urged them to treat all people who are suspected of having committed atrocities or crimes against human rights under the previous regime to be treated in accordance with international standards of due process. We were promised that this would be the case and that international observers such as the Red Cross would be invited to observe the entire process. So far, most people who have been arrested have been released to go home to await further action, and we have not seen mass roundups or any sort of absence of due process.
So all indications are then that we're not going to be seeing any accusations of massive human rights abuses from whatever the new coalition is that finally takes shape?
For the moment, everything is being done correctly from that point of view.
If I may, for another...
Indeed.
Those of us who have had the privilege, even under the most trying of circumstances, to visit Ethiopia, as you have on any number of occasions, and as I have over the years, I'm sure have been particularly touched by the children of Ethiopia and their demeanor and their sense of self-pride and human dignity, despite the most adverse of conditions in which they live. Many of us are very, very hopeful that the reference to whatever aid package we can put together would be being worked on right now, even before all of the pieces are in place, so that if indeed the new government in Ethiopia and Eritrea live up to the kinds of expectations that we have, that we would be ready at the get-go to be of massive assistance. Most of the American people don't know the difference between Eritreans and Tigrayans and Gondar and Asmara and any of these places that some of us might be familiar with. And there is sort of a donor burnout, as I guess it's been called. And the situation in Ethiopia has been looked at to a great extent by many in the American community as people who have quibbled among themselves politically over the years, while so many of their children have starved to death. And I, for one, am very, very hopeful that the new government and the new people that are coming into place, certainly those that I've have been able to meet with, will be able to dispel that notion and to allow us to help them in the way that would be most effective.
I agree with that, sir.
Thank you very much. We'll have one final round of questions from Mr. Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, I understand, Secretary Cohen, excuse me, I understand that we probably will be increasing our aid package to Ethiopia once they resolve their political differences. But have we given any thought to getting American industry and technologies over there that will help them become self-sufficient long-term? The reason I bring that up, I had a gentleman in my office about a week ago who has provided technology to Nigeria, which allows for pumping water from subterranean sources and also from rivers nearby to villages, and it's virtually saved hundreds of thousands of lives and made them productive citizens and able to stand on their own 2 feet. And it appears to me from some of the information I have coming out of Ethiopia that similar things could be done there to help make that population virtually self-sufficient in the long term if they had that kind of technology available to it. So I guess my question is also an admonition, and that is that I hope that our government and the State Department looks with favor upon getting these kinds of technologies over there just as quickly as we can after humanitarian relief gets there, so that we could start training these people in technologies and ways to make themselves self-sufficient so they don't have to depend on the rest of the world for their existence.
My colleagues in AID have assured me that they're starting to plan now for assistance to Ethiopia, which is too big a country to ignore and certainly deserves our help.
If I might just make one comment to our chairman, and that is, Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate it if we would consider holding hearings on this kind of technology and the needs that some of these countries in the region have. I think Sudan, Somalia, and Ethiopia all probably could benefit from these kinds of technologies, and if we could have a hearing, maybe have some of their people come in and talk to us as well as these business people, it might be very helpful.
There's a development assistant hearing scheduled, but we don't have a date yet. We awaited Mr. Cohen's support in the passage of the Foreign Assistance Act.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen, for coming.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. The next round of witnesses include Professor Wally Merriam, Dr. Abreha, Mr. Deresa, Mr. Wuldi, and Dr. Georgi. Will you please take your... We have chairs for all of the witnesses. And for those outside, we can accommodate about 5 people now. Officer, we can accommodate about 5. We can use the front seats now.
Georgis.
Okay, we shall proceed. Professor Merriam, would you put the microphone, speak, and would all the witnesses identify themselves again for the record, please? Yes.
My name is Masfrul Merriam. I am from Addis Ababa. I am a retired professor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is with a profound sense of gratitude and appreciation that I recognize this privilege granted to me this afternoon. I will be very brief. I have some historical background material, very brief, that I will leave out, and will talk only on present concerns. Allow me to relate a story I heard just before coming to the United States. An elderly lady, the mother-in-law of someone I know, was expressing great concern for the health of President Bush and was praying. Her son-in-law was curious to know the reason. She told him that President Bush was engaged in the task of bringing reconciliation and peace to Ethiopia, and that she did not want anything to happen to him. I think the lady, in her simple and perhaps naive way, was expressing the confidence that all Ethiopians had on the London negotiations that were to start on 27 May 1991. The expectation of all Ethiopians was that the London negotiations under the chairmanship of the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Mr. Herman Cohn, would come up with a peace plan for a new, democratic and unified Ethiopia. As it turned out, however, there were no negotiations in London. The process broke down during the preliminary meetings before all the parties met together even once. I was in London at that time, Mr. Chairman. The government delegation's press release called it backdoor deals, and the Oromo People's Liberation Front, OLF, declared that the negotiations had died before they even started. As a result, the Ethiopian people are now confronted with the following facts. A, with U.S. consent, a separate administration is set up in Eritrea under EPLF, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. With U.S. recommendation, a new administration is set up in Eritrea under EPRDF, the Ethiopian People's Democratic and Revolutionary Front. See, the two fronts installed in Addis Ababa and Asmara have unified military and political stand on the question of Eritrea. D, the two fronts have presently uncontested military supremacy over most of Ethiopia. In spite of these facts, there is still some hope for steering the two fronts toward the democratic process which will serve the interests of each group as well as the strength of the whole. This seems the only avenue to durable peace in Ethiopia. People who talk of Amhara, whatever it means, Tigrayan rivalry, miss the real issue. There is no truth in the allegation that the opposition to EPRDF in Ethiopia and abroad is based on ethnic or language differences. It is rather their position on the Eritrean question that continues to generate opposition. It may be important to bear in mind that when the war was intensifying in Tigray, the people moved by the thousands to the south, to the areas of Amharic speakers. When the war was intensifying around Asmara, thousands came to Addis Ababa. Do these facts indicate any mistrust between the two language groups? In the long history of Ethiopia, there is no record of armed conflict between the two language groups. The historical problem in Ethiopia has been regional, not tribal or ethnic. Let's also remember that of the three military leaders that Ethiopia had after the so-called revolution, none of them was what would be called Amhara by the definition of the experts. Another misconception is that the opposition to EPRDF comes from the remnants of the Mengistu regime. Nothing can be further from the truth. The regime was rejected almost completely by the bureaucracy, the military, the peasantry, and even by the members of the party. A real cause for concern related to the London event is the diminishing role of the Voice of America's Amharic program. The contribution of this program in the last 3 years in raising levels of awareness of the Ethiopian people, in fostering the values of the freedom of press, in providing accurate information and a forum for all groups has been immense. I know that Mengistu's regime did its best to stifle that free voice from America. Now I am shocked to learn from Addis Ababa that the program is on the verge of losing its priority. I see two problems here. One is that if the Voice of America's Amharic program is stifled, or even appears to be stifled, for expediency, we in Ethiopia do not only lose a radio program, we lose the best thing that we can ever learn from the United States, the practice of freedom. The other problem is that it sends the wrong signal to the new powers in Addis Ababa and Asmara. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say most Ethiopians strongly feel that the United States has the moral responsibility to steer the country toward democratic pluralism, which is the only way to bring about lasting peace and stability in the whole country. Ethiopians ask no more than that. We all hope that the United States, in accordance with its best traditions, will continue to promote freedom, democracy, unity, and peace for the region. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your brevity.